Welcome back to Adam's Invisible Hand. I had somebody yesterday ask me about Boeing and if it was a good investment because it had lost so much of its value during COVID and that now COVID's over and is it going to take back off. Remember, people seem to have forgotten, Boeing tanked pre-COVID. COVID's over here. Um, Boeing's problems all started um, with the 737 MAX, because if you look at pre-COVID, there was really two players in the industry. There was Airbus, the monopoly of Europe, and Boeing, the monopoly of the United States. And you can see here's their trailing revenue. And if you look, COVID became a thing down here, but you can see that Boeing's revenue was crashing all the way through 2018 and 2019. And there was a couple of things. Boeing has three primary revenue sources: selling airplanes, selling irrelevant stuff to NASA, and then servicing and training on airplanes. Well, SpaceX showed up, and as much as everybody laughed at Musk initially, Musk now carries 80% plus of the payload weight to space, and his closest competitor is the Chinese government. He's carrying all of the astronauts. SpaceX calls them passengers because it's all electronically controlled flight. And so Boeing had its monopoly with Lockheed Martin called United Launch, ULA, which was really just a monopoly of the two companies, so we didn't have to bid against each other. SpaceX has wiped that off the table, so that hurts them. The bigger problem that really showed up on the scene, and it especially hit in 2019, is Boeing hasn't designed an airplane since they really were taken over by the accountants at McDonnell Douglas, doing the consolidating through the 90s. Anytime they got competition, they would just buy it and keep building the monopoly. So the 737 was their primary plane, and what happened was the Airbus 320 came out, and that used a much bigger engine, was much more competitive. So for Boeing to compete, they needed to stick the engine out in front of the wing instead of under the wing, and that creates torque, which lifts up on the front of the plane. Here's a timeline. 2017 they got certification by claiming that it's the same plane with minor modifications. Then in 2017 they put it out in service, and then in 2018 October they had the first crash. They tried to blame it on the pilots, even though they internally knew that they had put in this software system so that when the plane would be climbing and then start to climb too much and stall, the software would take over. It didn't. It failed. Then they kept going with that. Then in 2019 in March they had a second crash. Same thing. They blamed the pilots. They knew it was the plane. They knew the thing was unstable and wouldn't even really take off without software manipulation. And then the FAA didn't actually shut it down until the Chinese administrators and the EASA, the European Aeronautics, the Europe equivalent of space of FAA, shut it down. So Boeing, these are Boeing's, by the way, Boeing's own presentations of, this is what they changed on the plane. They put this new engine on. You see how they even had to flatten the bottom of the engine? Problem is Boeing has these wing problems where their wings come loose, so they have the wings under the fuselage. Airbus has found a way to put them on the side. Boeing hasn't figured that out, so now they have to put the thing way up in the air and flatten the engines, and then they still can't get these gigantic engines underneath. You can see they even raised the landing gear. Again, this is Boeing's own source, Boeing, that they're saying that they raise the front of the nose on takeoff. They've got this gigantic engine under the wing, and they use this maneuvering characteristic augmentation system. That's the software that's trying to keep the nose from going too high up and stalling the plane. The thing is just inherently unstable. The way an engineer explained it to me was, take a school bus and move the wheels forward. The thing's gonna try and pull a wheelie every time you try to take off, and that's essentially what Boeing's dealing with. But The new thing that's happening on Boeing and Boeing stock as of late is right here is where something happened in China in 2022, and right here is where Biden announced that the U.S. is going to extend its trade war. That, Trump started the trade war on agriculture, mechanical parts, chips. Biden has now extended it to aeronautics equipment. And the reason that Biden went out there and really pushed in June, July, and October and got this protectionism set up mostly for Boeing more than anything else is right here. This is the Chinese Comac 919. It's pretty much a knockoff of Boeing's big competitor, the Airbus, and it's got the big LEAP engines, and it's got a good fuselage designed for it, and it's now been through its test flights this summer. And when this thing takes off, that's pretty much the end for Boeing, because if you look, the development, May 28th they developed it. Flight testing, let's go down to the flight testing. 2022, on September 29th, the Civil Aeronautics of China issued airworthiness certificate to Comac. So that means these things are now going to go into production and start flying, and that means most new planes are not being sold in the US, and Airbus controls Europe. That's where they are. It's all Asia and Middle East. So if China's going to sell an Airbus type plane, see, look how big these engines are and how the wings are up. So when you've got a wing further down and try to put the engines underneath, Boeing needs to come up with a new plane. They just don't have any engineers left. They're just accountants. So Boeing's goose is cooked. They're done. It's just a question of how long the U.S. government will subsidize keeping them going. Their biggest financier is J.P. Morgan, which is the largest private enterprise after the Saudi Aramco in the world. Don't anybody tell you Apple's the biggest. Apple doesn't have any leverage on their balance sheets, so the largest market cap. But from an enterprise value standpoint, J.P. Morgan's almost as big as Apple and Google together. There's no way J.P. Morgan would be risking financing this much money to Boeing with this Comac 919 coming down the runway, except for the fact that the U.S. federal government's going to back Boeing into the ground like they did with General Motors when General Motors went bankrupt. So unless Boeing actually comes out with a new narrow body commuter plane to compete with the Comac 919 and to compete with the Airbus, this is the end of Boeing. Right here, you're seeing it. Sometime in 2024, Boeing goes bankrupt. Thanks, subscribe. Talk to you later.